In the vast silence of the frontier, the loudest sound is not a gunshot, but the beating of a heart that has found its song in another. The town of Redemption was a place of dust and desperation, but the saloon held a single point of light: Margaret. She sat at the upright piano, her fingers dancing over the yellowed keys. The music she played was not the usual rowdy tune. It was a melody full of longing, a sound that spoke of distant green hills and a life left behind. Her music cut through the thick air of smoke and cheap whiskey, silencing the gamblers and weary cowboys. They listened, caught in the spell of a beauty that did not belong in this harsh land. Each note was a testament to her resilience, a quiet rebellion against the grit and grime of her surroundings. She played for herself, but one man listened as if the song was meant only for him. From a shadowed corner, Hawkeye watched her. He was a man of the plains, a Comanche whose presence in the saloon was tolerated but not welcomed. He came not for the drink, but for the music. It reminded him of the wind singing through the canyons, a sound both powerful and gentle. He saw the strength in Margaret's delicate hands and the fire in her eyes when she played. It was a spirit he recognized, a spirit that mirrored the untamed land he called home. He never spoke to her. Words were clumsy things. Instead, he listened, and in the shared silence of the music a connection formed, a silent understanding that transcended the divide between their two worlds. But they were not the only ones who noticed Margaret. A man who called himself Scorpion watched her with a different kind of interest. He was the leader of a ruthless gang of smugglers, his eyes cold and calculating like the creature he was named after. He did not hear the beauty in the music. He saw a tool. He noted the unusual depth of the piano's body, the way it was built, solid and heavy. An idea, sharp and venomous, took root in his mind. He saw a perfect hiding place, a clever disguise for his illicit cargo. Margaret was not a musician to him. She was a component in a machine of greed and violence, and he intended to make her a part of his operation. Scorpion approached her after the last song, his smile a thin, predatory line. He complimented her playing, his voice smooth but laced with an undeniable menace. He spoke of a profitable venture, a special delivery. He explained that her piano was perfect for transporting delicate goods that needed to be hidden from prying eyes. He meant guns. Margaret's hands grew cold. She looked into his flat, dark eyes and saw nothing but avarice. She refused, her voice steady despite the fear that coiled in her stomach. "My music is not for sale, and neither am I," she told him. Scorpion's smile vanished. He nodded slowly, but it was not a gesture of acceptance. It was a promise of future trouble. The following evening, the air in the saloon felt heavy with unspoken threats. Margaret played, but her focus was fractured. She could feel Scorpion's eyes on her from across the room. Every shadow seemed to hold one of his men. The music was her only shield, a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. Hawkeye was there too, his gaze fixed on Scorpion. He had seen the confrontation the night before and understood the danger Margaret was in. He saw the way Scorpion's men were positioned near the doors, not like patrons, but like wolves waiting to surround their prey. He knew he had to do something, but in this town, he was an outsider, his hands tied by prejudice. Scorpion made his move not with words, but with a quiet, chilling gesture. He had one of his men place a small, beautifully carved wooden box on her piano. When she finished her song, she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, perfect white rose. But its stem was covered in sharp thorns, and a drop of what looked like blood stained one of the petals. It was a clear message: beauty and pain, a gift and a warning. A cold dread washed over her. This was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of ownership. She closed the box, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a rhythm of pure terror. Later that night, as Margaret walked back to her small room at the boarding house, the shadows detached themselves from the walls. Two of Scorpion's men cornered her in the alley. There was no struggle, no scream. They were professionals. One grabbed her arms while the other held a cloth over her face. The world dissolved into a sickeningly sweet smell, and then darkness. They carried her away into the night, leaving the alley empty except for the faint scent of chloroform and the distant, mocking sound of a coyote's howl. The town slept on, oblivious to the quiet act of violence that had just occurred within its dusty streets. Hawkeye had waited, sensing the night was wrong. When Margaret did not emerge from the saloon's back entrance at her usual time, he moved from the shadows. He followed her path, his senses on high alert. In the alley, the unnatural chemical smell hit him first. Then he saw it on the ground. The small wooden box with the rose inside, trampled into the dirt. The thorns had been crushed. He knew then that Scorpion had taken her. A cold, hard rage settled in his chest. This was no longer about silent admiration from a distance. This was a debt that would be paid, not in gold, but in fear and retribution under the vast, uncaring sky. The trail was faint, but Hawkeye was a master of reading the land. He found the tracks of 3 men and a woman being dragged, the scuff marks of her boots, a silent scream in the dirt. They had taken her east, towards the Badlands, a maze of canyons and rock formations where a man could disappear forever. He moved with a purpose that was almost preternatural, his eyes scanning every broken twig, every disturbed stone. He was not just a tracker, he was a force of nature, an extension of the wilderness itself. He carried little, only a bow, a quiver of arrows, and a knife. He did not need anything else. His skill and his rage would be his most potent weapons. Margaret awoke with a throbbing headache in the back of a wagon. The specially built piano was there with her, a monstrous hollow thing. Scorpion sat across from her, cleaning a revolver. He told her they were going to a secure location where she would wait until she agreed to his plan. He spoke to her as if she were a difficult child, his tone patronizing. "You will learn that cooperation is always the easiest path," he said. Margaret said nothing. She stared out at the passing landscape, her mind racing. Fear was a cold stone in her stomach, but beneath it, a spark of defiance began to glow. She would not be a pawn in his game. As they traveled, Margaret searched for anything she could use, any way to fight back or leave a sign. In the small satchel they had allowed her to keep, her fingers brushed against something small and metal. A harmonica, a cheap toy she had bought for a child in town, a gift she never had the chance to deliver. An idea sparked in her mind. She thought of Hawkeye, of the quiet way he listened to her music. She remembered a simple melody he had once hummed, a Comanche lullaby he had shared without words, just a soft sound on the air one evening. It was a long shot, a desperate hope, but it was all she had. That night, as the bandits made camp, she waited. The guards were lax, confident in their remote location. When the wind picked up, rustling through the sagebrush, she put the harmonica to her lips. She played the melody, soft and clear, a string of notes that floated into the darkness. It was a simple tune, one that most would dismiss as the sighing of the wind. But it was not meant for most. It was a message for one man, a call sent out into the vast, lonely wilderness. She played it again and again, a prayer made of music, hoping it would find its way through the night to the only person who could save her. Hawkeye moved through the night like a phantom. He had been following the wagon's tracks for 2 days, his body fueled by grim determination. The trail was easy to follow, but he knew it could be a trap. Scorpion was a cunning man who would likely have outriders watching their back trail. So Hawkeye did not follow directly. He shadowed them, using ridges and gullies to stay hidden, his knowledge of the terrain giving him a significant advantage. He was patient. He knew his moment would come, but it had to be on his terms, in a place of his choosing. The land was his ally, and it would help him deliver his own form of justice. He made his own camp miles away from the bandits, a small, smokeless fire that provided warmth but no light. As he chewed on a piece of dried meat, he thought of Margaret. He recalled the way her music filled the saloon, a stark contrast to the rough men and rougher life that surrounded her. She was like a desert flower, beautiful and strong, blooming in the most unlikely of places. His resolve hardened into something unbreakable. This was more than a rescue. It was a fight for something pure in a world that was anything but. He would not let Scorpion crush that beauty. He would bring her back, no matter the cost. The bandits were growing careless. They were deep in their own territory now and believed no one would be foolish enough to follow them. Their laughter around the campfire was loud and arrogant. Scorpion sat apart from them, staring into the flames, his mind on his profits. He saw the weapons, the gold, the power. Margaret was just a key to that future, a temporary inconvenience. He had underestimated her spirit, and he had completely dismissed the quiet Comanche who watched her from the shadows. It was a fatal miscalculation, an oversight born of arrogance that would soon unravel his carefully laid plans. As Hawkeye prepared to move out under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, he heard it. At first it was just a whisper on the wind, so faint he thought he was imagining it. But then it came again, clearer this time. A simple, haunting melody. The Comanche lullaby. His heart leaped. It was her. She was alive, and she was thinking of him. It was a sign, a thread of sound, connecting them across the miles of desolate wilderness. The sound told him more than her location. It told him her spirit was not broken. He now had a beacon to follow, a song of hope that cut through the darkness and guided him forward. The music became his compass. Each night he would listen for the faint notes of the harmonica, and each night it guided him, confirming the direction of her travel. He was able to move faster now, more confidently. He abandoned the wagon tracks and took shortcuts through the treacherous terrain, his body and mind in perfect harmony with the wild. He was in his element, a hunter closing in on his quarry. The bandits were moving towards an old, abandoned mining outpost, a place notorious for being a haven for outlaws. Hawkeye knew the place well. He knew its weaknesses, its hidden entrances and escape routes. Inside the wagon, Margaret's hope grew with each passing day. The harmonica was a small act of defiance that kept her spirit alive. During the day, she endured Scorpion's taunts and the leering gazes of his men. She remained silent and observant. Gathering information, she noted the number of men, the types of weapons they carried, and their general lack of discipline. They were bullies and thugs, not soldiers. Their strength was in numbers and fear, but she sensed a core of cowardice beneath their bravado. She held on to this knowledge, knowing it might be her only weapon when the time came. One of the bandits, a young man named Finn, showed her a small kindness. He would sneak her an extra piece of bread or a canteen of fresh water when Scorpion was not looking. He seemed out of place among the others, his eyes holding a hint of regret. He told her he had joined the gang out of desperation, not malice. Margaret saw a flicker of humanity in him and tried to appeal to it. She spoke to him of right and wrong, of second chances. She planted a seed of doubt in his mind, hoping it might grow into something that could help her when the moment of confrontation finally arrived. Scorpion was not a fool. He noticed the change in Margaret's demeanor. Her quiet defiance was more unnerving than tears or pleas would have been. He became suspicious. One evening he heard the faint sound of the harmonica. He stormed to the wagon and ripped the instrument from her hands, his face contorted with rage. "What game are you playing?" he snarled. He crushed the harmonica under his boot. "There will be no more music." He had silenced her song, but he was too late. The message had been sent and received. The path was laid, and the hunter was already at the door. The silence was jarring. For 2 nights, Hawkeye heard nothing but the wind. The song was gone. He knew what it meant. Scorpion had discovered her secret. But it did not matter. Hawkeye had already reached the outskirts of the abandoned warehouse that served as the gang's hideout. He had seen the wagon tracks leading directly to it. The silence did not deter him. It sharpened his focus. He spent a full day observing the warehouse from a high ridge, his eyes missing nothing. He memorized the guards, patrol routes, the location of the horses, and the layout of the dilapidated buildings. He was planning a war with the precision of a master strategist. Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere was tense. Scorpion was on edge. He paced back and forth, yelling at his men for minor infractions. The weapons had arrived, packed tightly in crates, waiting to be loaded into the hollowed-out piano. Margaret was kept in a small windowless room, her hands tied. The loss of her harmonica felt like a physical blow, but she refused to despair. She listened intently to the sounds of the warehouse, trying to piece together a picture of her prison. She heard talk of a big shipment, of a meeting with buyers in a few days. Time was running out. Finn, the young bandit, was visibly troubled. He saw the cold brutality of Scorpion up close and wanted no part of it. He found a moment to speak with Margaret alone, pretending to check her restraints. He whispered that he was sorry and that he would help her if he could. "Just cause a distraction," he said. "Something big, something to make them all run." He pressed a small book of matches into her hand before leaving. It was a tiny object, but it felt as heavy as a stone, a weight of both hope and immense risk. She now had a desperate plan, a final fiery gamble. Hawkeye was ready. He had gathered what he needed from the surrounding wilderness: dry brush, pine sap, and a length of vine. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the canyon, he moved from his perch. He was a shadow himself, silent and unseen. He approached the corral where the gang kept their horses. The animals were the key. Without them, the bandits were trapped, their escape route cut off. His plan was not just to rescue Margaret, but to dismantle Scorpion's entire operation. He would use the gang's own arrogance and carelessness against them, turning their fortress into a trap. Under the faint light of a crescent moon, Hawkeye put his plan into motion. He crept towards the corral, his movements fluid and silent. With his knife, he cut a section of the rope fence, creating a wide opening. Then he moved to the upwind side of the camp and set a small, controlled fire using the dry brush and sap. The wind carried the smoke directly towards the horses. The animals, already skittish in the unfamiliar territory, grew panicked by the smell of fire. Their nervous whinnies turned into frantic neighs. The carefully constructed order of the camp was about to shatter. The commotion outside was immediate. The guards shouted in alarm, their attention drawn to the panicked horses. Several men ran from the warehouse to see what was happening. "The horses are spooked. Something is out there," one of them yelled. This was the diversion Finn had spoken of, the chaos Margaret needed. She heard Scorpion yelling orders, his voice tight with fury. He was angry, not scared. He was losing control, and it made him reckless. Most of the men were now outside, trying to calm the horses and find the source of the fire, leaving the warehouse virtually unguarded. This was her chance. Margaret worked her hands, the rough rope chafing her wrists. Finn had tied the knot loosely as promised. After a few agonizing moments, she was free. She crept out of the storage room. The main area of the warehouse was filled with wooden crates stacked high. The air smelled of oil and metal. She recognized the markings of a firearms manufacturer. This was Scorpion's entire arsenal. She pulled the book of matches from her pocket, her hands trembling. She knew the risk. Fire was an unpredictable beast. But it was the only way. She had to create a blaze so large they would have no choice but to flee. As the bandits struggled with the stampeding horses, Hawkeye used the chaos to his advantage. He slipped through the main entrance of the warehouse. An arrow knocked in his bow. He moved through the shadows, his eyes scanning for Margaret. He saw her standing near the crates, the flickering light of a match in her hand. For a moment, their eyes met across the cavernous room. There was no time for words. A look of understanding passed between them, a silent agreement. He gave a slight nod. He would cover her. He would deal with anyone who got in her way. Together, they would burn this place to the ground. Margaret did not hesitate. She dropped the lit match onto a pile of oily rags tucked between two of the largest crates. The effect was instantaneous. Flames erupted with a hungry roar, climbing the dry wooden boxes with terrifying speed. The fire cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. The heat was intense, a physical force that pushed her back. A thick, black smoke began to fill the warehouse, choking the air. The fire was not just a distraction anymore, it was a weapon, a wild and uncontrollable force of destruction that she had unleashed. Panic began to take hold. The roar of the fire and the crackle of burning wood alerted the men outside. A few of them, including Scorpion, ran back into the warehouse. Their faces, illuminated by the growing inferno, were masks of disbelief and rage. "My weapons!" Scorpion screamed, his voice filled with fury. He saw Margaret standing near the blaze, her face resolute. He drew his revolver, his eyes promising death. But before he could aim, An arrow hissed out of the shadows and struck the gun from his hand, sending it clattering across the floor. He clutched his stinging hand, his head whipping around to find the source of the attack. Hawkeye stepped from the shadows, another arrow already aimed at Scorpion's chest. The remaining bandits froze, caught between the raging fire behind them and the silent hunter in front of them. Their bravado evaporated, replaced by primal fear. They were trapped. The fire was spreading rapidly, and the smoke was becoming unbearable. The structural beams of the old warehouse began to groan under the intense heat. The choice was simple: face the silent Comanche warrior or be consumed by the flames. One by one, they dropped their weapons and fled into the night, their only thought on survival. Only Scorpion remained, his face a snarl of hatred. He lunged for his fallen weapon, but Hawkeye was faster. He closed the distance between them, not with an arrow, but with the raw speed of a predator. The fight was short and brutal. Hawkeye used his knowledge of close-quarters combat, disarming and disabling Scorpion with a series of precise strikes. He did not kill him. He left him conscious enough to understand the totality of his defeat. As Hawkeye stood over the beaten man, Margaret came to his side. The fire raged around them, a funeral pyre for Scorpion's greed. With Scorpion subdued, Hawkeye and Margaret knew they had to get out. The smoke was a thick, blinding fog, and the roar of the fire was deafening. The roof above them began to creak and splinter. Hawkeye grabbed Margaret's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. He led her through the maze of falling debris and scorching heat, his knowledge of the building's layout guiding them through the chaos. They moved as one, a team forged in crisis. They burst out of a side door just as a large section of the roof collapsed behind them, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. They were alive. They were free. Outside, the scene was one of utter chaos. The fire from the warehouse lit up the entire canyon. The remaining bandits were scattered and disorganized, trying to round up the last of the horses. Finn, the young bandit, saw Margaret and Hawkeye emerge from the flames. He gave them a hesitant nod before melting away into the darkness, choosing freedom over a future in a gang that had just been destroyed. He was a small, forgotten player in a much larger drama, a footnote in their story. Hawkeye and Margaret paid him no mind. Their focus was on the man they had left inside. They found Scorpion crawling from the entrance, his clothes singed, his face black with soot. He was defeated, but his eyes still burned with impotent rage. Hawkeye used a length of rope from a nearby wagon to bind Scorpion's hands securely. The great gang leader, the man who inspired fear throughout the territory, was now their prisoner. He spat curses at them, calling them savages and heathens, but his words were empty, lost in the roar of the fire he had inadvertently helped create. His empire of smuggled guns had been turned to ash and smoke in a single night. As the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, the fire started to die down, leaving the warehouse a smoldering skeleton. Hawkeye found 2 horses that had not fled in the panic. He helped Margaret onto one and hoisted the bound Scorpion onto the other. They did not look back at the destruction. They rode west, back towards the town of Redemption. The journey was quiet, the only sound the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. The ordeal was over, but something new was just beginning. The silence between them was no longer one of distance, but of shared experience and a deep, unspoken bond. Their arrival in Redemption caused a stir. The sight of the quiet Comanche warrior leading a horse with the notorious outlaw Scorpion tied to it brought people out of their homes and businesses. The sheriff, a weary but honest man, met them in the middle of the street, his eyes wide with disbelief. Hawkeye explained what had happened in simple, direct terms. He spoke of the kidnapping, the smuggled weapons, and the fire. He did not embellish or boast. He simply stated the facts. Margaret stood by his side, corroborating his story. Her presence was all the proof the sheriff needed. Scorpion was locked in a jail cell, his threats and curses echoing down the hall until the heavy door slammed shut, silencing him for good. The law would deal with him now. The sheriff looked at Hawkeye, a new respect in his eyes. "The territory owes you a debt," he said, offering his hand. Hawkeye looked at the offered hand for a moment before shaking it. It was a small gesture, but in this town it was a monumental shift. He was no longer just an outsider, a Comanche to be tolerated. He was a man who had brought justice to their town. He had earned his place. Later that day, Margaret stood with Hawkeye on a small hill overlooking the town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The dust of redemption looked almost beautiful in the fading light. "You heard me," she said softly, her voice full of wonder. "Across all that distance, you heard my song." Hawkeye looked at her, his dark eyes gentle. "A song of the heart is louder than the wind," he replied. His words were simple, but they held the weight of everything they had been through, of everything they now felt for each other. She reached out and took his hand. Their fingers intertwined, a natural fit. There were no more barriers between them, no more silent divides. They were two people from different worlds who had found a common language in courage, loyalty, and music. They did not know what the future held. Life in this land was hard and uncertain. But as they stood together, watching the last of the sun disappear behind the distant mesas, they knew they would face it together. Their story was not just one of rescue, but of a love that had bloomed in the harshest of soils, a melody of hope on the wild frontier.